Welcome to today's deep dive. We've got a really fascinating topic lined up for you today.
We really do.
But before we even get into the weeds on this, I want to throw a highly specific, maybe slightly embarrassing question your way.
Oh boy. Okay.
No, hear me out. Think back to the last time you were walking down the aisle of a home goods store. Or, maybe just mindlessly scrolling through an online kitchenware catalog.
Right.
Have you ever found yourself suddenly hit with this just irrational, overwhelming surge of adrenaline over a household appliance?
Like a toaster.
Well, no, I'm not talking about like a polite appreciation for a nice blender. I mean, genuine heart-racing text your friends enthusiasm because you just discovered a really, really good non-stick sauté pan.
Oh, yeah, the sauté pan?
Right. And if you're smiling right now because you know exactly what that feels like, or even if you're entirely baffled as to how a piece of cookware could trigger an existential awakening, you are in exactly the right place today.
It really is the perfect litmus test for what we're breaking down today.
Oh.
Because getting overly excited about cookware is this wonderfully mundane, almost cliche milestone.
It's so cliche.
But it points to something incredibly profound. So today we're unpacking a really engaging conversation we've been reviewing between two people, Emma and John. And they essentially sat down and mapped out one of the most universal yet bizarrely underanalyzed human experiences.
Which is that massive psychological, emotional, and physical shift that happens when you cross the bridge from your 20s into your 30s.
Exactly. It's that chaotic, messy transition from having this boundless, almost reckless energy of youth to settling into the deliberate, highly consolidated reality of your 30s.
And what makes Emma and John's conversation so compelling is that it doesn't read like a clinical psychology textbook.
No, not at all.
They aren't just skimming the surface with generic observations about getting older. They really get into the absolute granular reality of how this shift literally feels in your bones, how it rewires your bank account, and ultimately how it completely reconstructs your internal monologue. It's so relatable because it's so specific.
Yeah, and the reason this is so relevant to you, the listener, is because this trajectory is practically woven into our DNA. It doesn't matter where you are on this timeline.
Right.
Maybe you're in your early 20s right now, looking ahead at 30 with this weird mix of dread and intense curiosity. Or maybe you are right in the thick of it, currently navigating that exact transition.
Wondering why you suddenly have a fierce defensive preference for staying home on a Friday night.
Exactly. Or maybe you're looking back on this whole era from the vantage point of your 40s or 50s, nodding along as we describe it.
Just laughing at us.
Right. But whatever your current vantage point, this discussion acts as a mirror. It reflects that universal human evolution from a state of constant becoming into a much more grounded state of simply being.
The evolution from becoming to being. I genuinely love that framing, and I want to spend a lot of time tearing that apart later.
We definitely will.
But to get there, we really need to start with the physical reality, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the most immediate, undeniable change that John and Emma focus on first, which is the absolute cliff dive of physical vitality.
It really is the most tangible marker, isn't it? I mean, you can philosophize all you want about emotional maturity, but the physical reality is what forces the issue.
It's the check engine light coming on.
Yeah. In their conversation, they talk about the 20s as an era characterized by this perception of boundless stamina. You are operating with this pervasive sense of invincibility.
It's the era of the sleep deficit. Think about it. In your 20s, you can work a full, demanding 10-hour day at a job where you are probably stressed and trying to prove yourself. And then you still possess this unyielding, almost supernatural vigor to go out and socialize until 2 in the morning.
And then you just wake up and do it again.
Yeah, Emma points out that you genuinely believe you can burn the candle at both ends. And not only are there zero immediate repercussions, but you kind of feel like the wax just magically replenishes itself overnight.
You're running on a completely different operating system.
Yeah.
But then, as John points out, the 30s arrive. And he introduces this concept that I think is just brilliant.
Oh, the invoice.
Yes. He says that right around 30, your body abruptly presents you with a metabolic invoice, complete with accrued interest.
A metabolic invoice. I love that phrase so much.
It's so good. Let's really pause and analyze that, because using an economic metaphor for human biology is incredibly astute. What does it actually mean to owe a debt to your own body?
Well, if you think about how credit works in your 20s, you are essentially spending physical energy on a credit card with no limit.
Right.
You're borrowing from tomorrow to fund the hedonism of today. Going to that concert on a Tuesday night, put it on the card. Skipping meals and living on iced coffee. Put it on the card. Because you're 23, the credit limit is infinite and the interest rate feels like it's 0%. You don't even realize you're racking up a biological debt because the statements never come in the mail.
But the statements are accumulating.
They are.
That's the accrued interest part of John's metaphor. And it's devastatingly accurate from a physiological standpoint.
Yeah.
The debt doesn't just sit in a ledger, it compounds.
Oh, yeah.
The physical toll of those late nights, the dietary indulgences, the chronic low-level stress of pushing your limits, it all compounds at a cellular level. And then the promotional 0% APR period of your 20s expires.
And the bill arrives.
The bill arrives.
And arrives with a vengeance. John tells this amazing story in the text that perfectly illustrates this. He talks about how he used to celebrate his birthday.
The birthday marathon.
Yes, in his 20s, his birthday wasn't just a day on the calendar. He describes it as a month-long festival of hedonism.
A whole month.
A month. He would curate these elaborate countdowns, organizing multiple events, bar crawls, dinners, late-night parties that would go until dawn. It was an absolute marathon, and he survived it. He thrived on it.
Right. But contrast that with his recent experience in his 30s. He points out that now a single night of moderate revelry results in a mandatory recovery period that spans roughly 48 hours.
The math has completely changed.
Completely. One night out now equals 2 full days of physical, cognitive, and emotional rehabilitation.
He specifically describes going to a friend's gathering recently. He stayed out past midnight, had a few drinks, nothing completely insane. But the following morning, he wasn't just experiencing normal tiredness.
No, he was wrecked.
He says he was effectively incapacitated. He spent a solid hour just lying there, staring at the ceiling in a complete state of cognitive fog.
We have all been there.
Just staring at the drywall, completely unable to form a single coherent thought, waiting for your brain to slowly reboot like an old computer from the 90s.
That image, the cognitive fog staring at the ceiling, it perfectly encapsulates this elongated restoration process. It's the starkest contrast to the instantaneous recuperation of your youth.
Yeah.
Emma notes in their chat that it essentially boils down to a matter of resilience. When you're young, the biological spring is tightly coiled. You push it down, it snaps right back.
Why?
Exactly. But in your 30s, that spring just loses a little bit of its tension. It takes longer to reset to its baseline.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second, because this is where a lot of people push back.
Okay, go for it.
If we accept that the spring is losing tension and we have this 48-hour cognitive fog after a night out, aren't we just admitting defeat?
Defeat in what way?
Like, does this physical slowdown inherently mean we're resigning ourselves to a duller, less vibrant existence? Are we just getting boring?
That is exactly the fear that drives so much anxiety around turning 30. The assumption that if I can't close down the bar at 3 a.m., my life is fundamentally over. But John fiercely rejects that premise, and I think he's right to do so. He argues that interpreting this shift as getting boring is a massive misconception. It's not about doing less, it's about becoming significantly more discerning.
Which makes sense. When something is infinite, you don't value it.
Exactly.
When your energy is infinite in your 20s, you throw it at everything. But the second that elongating restoration process hits, it forces a necessary change in your lifestyle.
It forces a massive recalibration. Think about it in terms of that economic metaphor again. When your energy becomes a finite, precious resource, when you realize you can no longer afford the accrued interest of that metabolic invoice, you suddenly become a very strict auditor of your own physical capital.
Oh, absolutely.
You start calculating the return on investment for every single social outing.
Yes. You get invited to a Tuesday night drinks thing, and you actually do the math.
You pull out the mental spreadsheet.
You do. You ask yourself, is this specific gathering with these specific people worth the 48 hours of cognitive fog I'm going to endure on Wednesday and Thursday?
And a lot of the time, honestly, the answer is a resounding no.
And that no isn't a tragic loss of vibrancy. It's an upgrade in quality control. Diminished energy doesn't lead to a curated existence so much as it demands one. You stop squandering yourself on things that don't matter.
Which is such a seamless way to look at how the evolution of our physical energy completely dictates the evolution of our social lives. Because you can't talk about auditing your energy without talking about the people you're spending it on.
The social landscape undergoes an absolute earthquake during this decade. Emma and John spend a lot of time dissecting this shift. They describe it as moving from a deep-seated compulsion to be ubiquitous to becoming highly discerning, highly selective about your engagements.
Ubiquitous.
Yeah, everywhere.
The desire to be everywhere, doing everything with everyone all at once. That is the defining hallmark of the 20s social scene. And Emma nails exactly what drives that compulsion. FOMO. The fear of missing out. It's almost a cliche at this point, but it's a cliche because it's a profound psychological driver. In your 20s, FOMO isn't just a fleeting feeling. It is the central engine of your entire social existence.
It really is.
Yeah.
There is this underlying low-grade terror that if you skip one gathering, if you decide to stay in and read a book instead of going to that impromptu dinner, you are going to miss the defining legendary moment of your friend group's history.
Like you'll be left out of the inside jokes forever.
Exactly. You feel like your social survival depends on your physical presence. You feel like if you aren't seen, you cease to exist.
Wow, yeah.
Because of that fear, spontaneity becomes everything. John and Emma talk about how in your 20s, spontaneity is essentially the currency of youth.
The currency.
It's how you purchase social standing. Being the person who says, yes, let's go on a road trip at midnight, or yes, let's crash that party that proves you are vibrant, it proves you are engaged.
Spontaneity is highly valued because it demonstrates a lack of attachments and a surplus of energy. But as you transition into your 30s, you realize that this specific currency undergoes massive hyperinflation.
Its value just plummets.
It plummets. In fact, Emma says something incredibly striking. She says spontaneity ceases to be a currency entirely. It actually becomes an intrusion.
An intrusion. That is such a strong, heavy word to use for something that used to be the highlight of your week.
I know.
But John brings up this scenario that I think every single person listening to this will relate to on a spiritual level. He paints this picture. Imagine you are at home. It's 8:00 p.m. Could be a Tuesday, could be a Saturday. It almost doesn't matter.
You're just home.
Your phone buzzes. It's a text message from a friend proposing a spontaneous outing. Hey, a few of us are grabbing drinks downtown. Come meet up.
Let's really pause and dissect the anatomy of that 8:00 p.m. text. In your early 20s, an 8:00 p.m. text isn't an intrusion. It's the opening bell.
Right.
It's an invitation to adventure. Your night is just beginning. You probably aren't even fully dressed yet.
But in your 30s, John describes his immediate visceral internal reaction to that text as defensive.
Defensive.
I really want to linger on that word, defensive, because it implies that your quiet evening at home is a literal fortress, and that text message is a barrage of arrows trying to breach the walls.
A threat.
The invader, ironically, is your friend just asking to hang out, but it feels like a threat to your equilibrium.
It feels like a threat because of the physical manifestation of that defense. John points out a crucial detail. By 8:00 p.m., he has likely already donned his loungewear.
The absolute triumph of the loungewear, we have to talk about this because it is so real.
Of the soft pants.
The moment the rigid clothes of the public sphere, the jeans, the work trousers, whatever, the moment those come off, and the soft clothes, the sweatpants, the oversized t-shirt go on, a sacred boundary has been crossed.
Yes.
The social contract for that day has been officially, legally terminated.
It's the uniform of the private sphere. When John puts on the loungewear, he's stating that he is mentally committed to a tranquil evening. Ripping him out of that mindset requires a massive expenditure of willpower that he simply isn't willing to part with.
No way.
But here is the deeper psychological layer to this. This isn't just about being lazy or being too tired to put hard pants back on. It is deeply connected to a fundamental shift in values surrounding self-preservation.
Right, because in your 20s, if you get that text and you say no, what happens? You feel immense guilt.
So much guilt.
You feel like saying no is a direct insult to the person inviting you. You feel like you're rejecting their friendship.
Exactly. But the source material highlights that in your 30s, you undergo a vital cognitive reframe. Declining an invitation is no longer viewed as an insult to others. It is viewed as an essential act of guarding your own peace.
Guarding your peace.
You realize that your primary responsibility is to your own baseline well-being, not to the fleeting entertainment of your extended social network.
It really does become the ultimate priority because you realize how exhausting it was to perform for a superficial network for a whole decade.
So exhausting.
In your 20s, you're trying to maintain these vast, totally unmanageable webs of acquaintances. You have work friends, gym friends, college friends, friends of friends. You are spread incredibly thin, giving 5% of your energy to 50 different people.
And that model is unsustainable. Emma points out that the natural progression is to transition away from chaotic socialization toward a highly consolidated, intimate circle. You start prioritizing meaningful, deep interactions over shallow, ubiquitous ones.
It's the classic shift from having a wide, shallow river of friends to having a narrow but incredibly deep well. You realize you realistically only have the emotional and physical capacity to truly nurture a handful of core relationships.
Exactly.
So that defensive reaction to the 8.00 p.m. text, it's not antisocial, it's actually highly protective. Your mind is fiercely protecting the limited resources you need to maintain those few core relationships and, frankly, the resources you need to maintain your own sanity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this instinct to guard one's time and social energy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It naturally bleeds into how a person guards and views all their resources. The way you audit your energy is almost identical to how you begin to audit your wallet, which sets up a really fascinating parallel to their discussion on the financial mindset of the 20s versus the 30s.
Oh man, the fiscal psychology. This is where the source material gets incredibly pragmatic and honestly pretty hilarious.
It really is.
Because the contrast in how a 20-something views a dollar versus how a 30-something views a dollar is night and day. Emma and John note that in your 20s, income is viewed as almost entirely ephemeral.
Transitory.
It's transient. Money comes in on payday and it passes right through your hands like water.
The terminology John uses is great. He says money in your 20s is meant to be liquidated immediately on experiences.
Liquidated immediately.
Yes. There is a certain carefree negligence regarding the future. And if we look at it from a developmental psychology standpoint, this actually makes perfect sense. The 20s are fundamentally a time of exploration and data gathering. For most people, you are generally not burdened by 30-year mortgages, significant liabilities, or dependents. Your biggest project is funding your own character development.
Exactly. You are buying the spontaneity that we just talked about.
Yeah.
You are funding the ubiquity. You are buying rounds of drinks. You are booking cheap flights for weekend trips. You are paying covers at clubs.
Throwing it out there.
You are basically throwing money at the wall to see what kind of life sticks. But then as you cross that threshold into your 30s, the financial mindset undergoes a radical, almost whiplash-inducing transformation.
A complete 180.
That chaotic immediate liquidation of funds is replaced by this incredibly seductive allure of stability, pragmatism, and frugality.
The key word there is seductive. What's fascinating here is the psychological shift in what actually triggers the reward centers in the brain. What brings a person's satisfaction fundamentally rewires itself.
It completely changes.
In your 20s, your brain craves chaos and novelty. Novelty is the highest possible good. But in your 30s, as Emma argues, your brain starts to fiercely crave equilibrium. You want things to be predictable, you want them to be reliable, and you want them to be solid.
And nothing, I mean, absolutely nothing represents reliable, solid equilibrium quite like the defining anecdote of this entire conversation.
Here we go.
The sauté pan epiphany. This is what we teased at the very beginning of the show. John tells the story where someone asked him what he wanted for his birthday.
Right.
And instead of concert tickets or a weekend getaway, he found himself genuinely, deeply enthusiastic about requesting a high-caliber non-stick sauté pan.
And Emma calls him out on it.
Rightly so, calling this the absolute quintessential sign of maturation.
It's a brilliant, highly specific example because it perfectly encapsulates the entire paradigm shift of the transition. Think about what a high-caliber sauté pan actually represents.
What does it represent?
It is an investment in the domestic sphere. It's an investment in routine. It's an investment in long-term utility. It is the exact polar opposite of ephemeral spending on a fleeting night out that leaves you with a 48-hour hangover.
But the best part of the story is the enthusiasm. John admits that when he was talking about this pan, he was passionately explaining its thermal conductivity.
Thermal conductivity.
Thermal conductivity. He says he was speaking with a level of breathless passion and intensity that he used to reserve for hyping up music festivals.
I love that.
I just have to laugh at that mental image. He is literally trading the thumping bass and laser lights of a music festival for the even heat distribution of a kitchen appliance.
It's amazing.
But the level of enthusiasm hasn't dropped, it has just been completely redirected.
And that redirection from the external chaotic world to the internal domestic world is a massive hallmark of this era. Your home transitions from being just a place where you sleep between outings to being your primary sanctuary.
Yes.
And the source material pairs this sauté pan story with another incredibly telling example of this new fiscal psychology, which is grocery shopping.
Oh, yes.
John mentions that he recently found himself standing in the aisle comparing the unit prices of pasta.
The thrill of unit pricing.
He describes feeling this massive, disproportionate sense of triumph when he did the math and chose the most economical option.
It is a genuine adrenaline rush. You were standing there looking at the little tags on the shelf, and you realize that the 16-ounce box of penne is actually 2 cents cheaper per ounce than the 72-ounce family size because of some weird sale.
And you just feel so victorious.
And in that moment, you feel like a Wall Street hedge fund manager. You feel like a financial genius who has just beaten the system.
So beaten the pasta system.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to ask you, the listener, directly, when did you first notice this shift in yourself? Can you pinpoint the exact day or the exact mundane purchase when pragmatism suddenly became genuinely thrilling to you?
It's a great question.
When did a trip to the hardware store or a home goods store become more exciting than looking up the lineup for a nightclub?
It is a profound realization when it hits you. You realize that your entire value system has inverted. Because finding the most economical option on pasta isn't really about saving the 45 cents.
No.
Let's be honest, the 45 cents isn't changing your life. It is about what the act represents. It is a micro-assertion of control and stability in a world that often feels entirely chaotic and out of your hands. It represents that equilibrium that Emma notes becomes so incredibly seductive.
That makes total sense. We grasp for control where we can get it. But the thing is, getting excited about your kitchenware, meticulously organizing your finances, carefully curating your social calendar to protect your loungewear time. These are all really just the outward behavioral symptoms of a much, much deeper internal reorganization.
Right.
The way we spend our money and our physical time is just a reflection of how our internal mental landscape is changing. Which brings us to the heaviest, most complex part of Emma and John's conversation, the emotional evolution.
This is where the source material transcends quirky observations and delves into deep psychological territory. The internal landscape of the 20s, as they describe it, is intensely fraught.
Very fraught.
They frame the entirety of the 20s as a relentless, exhausting pursuit of identity.
A relentless pursuit. Just saying it out loud makes my shoulders tense up because it is so exhausting. When you are in your 20s, you are constantly plagued by imposter syndrome. And we throw that term around a lot, but let's really think about what it means in this context. You are entering the adult world. You have zero track record. And you are constantly looking around, measuring your own messy behind-the-scenes reality against the highly curated highlight reels of your peers.
Emma calls it an echo chamber of comparison.
An echo chamber.
The anxiety of comparison is arguably the most potent psychological force of that decade. And the source highlights the immense, crushing pressure young people feel to not only cement a viable career path, but to actively define a persona.
Define a persona.
Let's unpack that phrase, define a persona. It implies that in your 20s, your core identity is still highly malleable. You don't fully know who you are yet.
So you're just trying on hats.
Exactly. You are essentially trying on different masks, adopting different aesthetics, different vocabulary, different career ambitions, all to figure out which one elicits the best response from society.
It's a massive trial and error process, and it is incredibly stressful. You are basically auditioning for your own life.
Wow.
Emma observes that ambition in your 20s very rarely feels like joyful passion. It usually manifests as chronic stress.
Because the stakes feel so high.
You are pushing yourself to the absolute brink to hit these arbitrary milestones. Get the promotion by 25, get the apartment by 27, get engaged by 29.
Tick, tick, tick.
Because you have this underlying belief that once you hit those milestones, you will finally feel like a real adult. You are striving so incredibly hard for external validation.
You are looking for the world to tell you that you are okay. But then the 30s usher in this profound, quiet shift. The chronic stress of ambition begins to give way to profound self-awareness.
The fog lifts.
The source text points out that somewhere around 30, you begin to deeply understand your own limitations. You recognize your actual strengths, not the ones you wish you had, but the ones you actually have. And you become intimately aware of your own emotional triggers.
Yeah.
This is the crucial psychological turning point of adulthood.
It's the moment the war ends. It's the moment you finally stop fighting yourself. You look in the mirror and you realize, okay, I am not naturally organized, but I am highly creative.
Right.
I am not a great public speaker, but I'm an amazing writer. And this specific type of social dynamic makes me incredibly anxious.
And that's okay.
And instead of spending huge amounts of energy trying to fix or hide those flaws, You just accept them. You accept them as the fixed operating manual for your own brain.
And when you accept that operating manual, the desperate need for external validation naturally begins to dissipate. Because you finally know who you are, you no longer need the crowd to tell you who you are.
The feedback loop is internalized.
Emma beautifully and very succinctly articulates this as the critical difference between becoming and being.
Becoming versus being, I promise we would come back to this framing because it is the core thesis of everything we're talking about today. Let's really dwell on it.
Let's do it.
In your 20s, you are constantly becoming. You are a project under construction. You are contorting yourself to fit societal molds. You are squeezing your square peg self into round holes, whether that's forcing yourself into a corporate career path that makes you miserable, staying in a toxic relationship dynamic because it looks good on paper, or forcing yourself to hang out with a social group that drains your energy.
Right.
Becoming is a constant state of flux, friction, and tension.
It requires immense energy to maintain the contortion. But being, which is the hallmark of the 30s and the decades that follow, is about finding your own natural rhythm and resting in it.
Just resting.
It is the immense physical relief of finally understanding your boundaries and honoring them rather than constantly trying to bulldoze through them. When you stop contorting yourself, the chronic stress naturally subsides.
The tension just drops.
The sheer exhaustion of the 20s, the volatility of trying to be everything to everyone all the time, is replaced by the quiet, unshakable confidence of simply existing as yourself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because up until now, we've made the 30s sound like this enlightened promised land where everything is peaceful and you just cook pasta in your perfect sauté pan.
Right, sounds idyllic.
But this transition, this massive evolution from becoming to being, from chaos to clarity, it is not a clean, painless break.
No, it's not.
Emma and John acknowledge that this transition comes with deeply complex emotional trade-offs. It is not entirely without a very real, very palpable sense of loss.
The grand trade-off. This is without a doubt the most philosophically rich portion of their entire conversation. They engage in a very candid, almost vulnerable admission regarding what is actively mourned and conversely what is gladly left behind as one officially exits their youth.
John asks Emma a very direct, provocative question during their chat. He asks her, is there anything you genuinely lament losing from your 20s? Is there anything you actually miss?
And her answer is incredibly poetic.
She doesn't say she misses her metabolism or her lack of hangovers. She says she misses the infinite potentiality.
Infinite potentiality. That's a beautiful phrase. It captures that ephemeral feeling that every single door in the hallway of life was still wide open.
Wide open.
Emma uses this striking metaphor to explain it. She says that when she was 22, she felt like she could wake up tomorrow and decide to become an astronaut.
An astronaut.
Or she could pack a bag and move to Paris to become a poet. Let's really unpack the psychology of that. The paralysis of infinite choice versus the comfort of a chosen path.
In your 20s, you are standing at the absolute starting line of adulthood. You look out at the horizon and you see a million branching, diverging paths.
Every direction is an option.
You could move to a new country on a whim. You could completely change your major or your career trajectory. You could walk into a coffee shop and fall in love with a stranger and start a totally different life.
It's all possible.
You could literally, theoretically become an astronaut or a poet. And that feeling of boundless, unchecked possibility is incredibly intoxicating. It makes you feel like a god.
It is intoxicating, yes.
Yeah.
But as the source material is quick to note, it is also what leads directly to paralysis.
Oh.
When you have the freedom to do absolutely anything, deciding to do one specific thing becomes an agonizing burden. Because to choose one path, to say, I'm going to marry this person or I'm going to take this specific job, means you are simultaneously permanently killing off all the other potential versions of your life.
Man.
Every choice is a small death of potentiality. However, the true melancholy of aging, the thing Emma is mourning, is the realization that as time passes, choices inevitably crystallize whether you make them or not. As you age, certain paths simply close.
The astronaut door definitely closes. NASA has age limits.
Right.
The poet door might still be cracked open, but the window to be a 20-something child prodigy who takes the literary world by storm has definitively slammed shut.
Long gone.
There is a real, valid, profound grief in letting go of the infinite potentiality. When you mourn your 20s, you aren't just mourning your youth, you are mourning the loss of the infinite alternative versions of yourself that will now never exist. You are grieving the ghosts of the lives you didn't choose.
It's a heavy realization. But the source material brilliantly pivots and contrasts this very real melancholy, with the immense, overwhelming relief of what is gained in the trade.
What do you get back?
When Emma turns the question around and asks John what he does not miss about his 20s, he doesn't hesitate. He points directly to the pervasive insecurity.
He describes it so perfectly. He calls it the constant low-level hum of anxiety asking, am I enough?
The hum.
I think anyone who has lived through their 20s or is in them right now can hear that exact hum. It is the inescapable soundtrack of your youth.
Just buzzing in the background.
It's that underlying, vibrating fear that you are failing, that you are falling behind your peers, that you are making the wrong choices, and that fundamentally at your core, you are simply not enough.
John notes that the emotional turbulence required to sustain that hum in the 20s is exhausting. The highs of your 20s are incredibly high, fueled by the adrenaline of infinite potentiality and new experiences. But the lows are absolutely devastating, fueled by that pervasive, crushing insecurity.
It's a roller coaster.
Shedding that psychological burden, finally turning off that low-level hum of anxiety, is the true ultimate reward of the 30s.
He says point blank that he is far more content with the chosen tranquility of his 30s. And looking at the whole picture they've painted, I have to enthusiastically agree with their conclusion here.
I do too.
Emma makes a joke near the end of their chat. She says it seems like the ultimate trade-off for lost youth is gained wisdom, self-assurance, and a really high-quality sauté pan.
It all comes back to the pan.
And John says, without a doubt, it is a worthy exchange.
It is a highly favorable, exceptionally worthy exchange. If we take a step back and synthesize the overarching thesis of this entire source material, it paints a very clear, very reassuring picture of these two distinct eras of human life. The 20s are framed not as the best years of your life that you should desperately cling to, but as a necessary turbulent training ground. You must go through the awkward experimentation.
You have to.
You must endure the volatility, the heartbreaks, the bad financial decisions, and the expenditure of boundless energy just to figure out what works and what doesn't.
You have to experience the absolute chaos to truly appreciate the peace. The 20s are the crucible. They burn away the parts of you that aren't authentic. And the 30s are the reward for surviving the crucible.
Yeah, reward.
It is a decade of consolidation of deep, unshakable self-acceptance and of deliberate, intentional living. You trade the exhausting, terrifying emotional turbulence of youth for chosen, curated tranquility.
This brings us to a really beautiful point of reflection. As we recap the journey of this deep dive today, we have essentially traced the grand arc of early adulthood.
We have.
We started in the purely physical realm, examining the shift from the invincible, boundless, sleep-deprived energy of the 20s to the undeniable reality of the metabolic invoice, the accrued interest, and the absolute necessity of a 48-hour recovery period in the 30s.
We track the evolution of our social lives, moving away from the chaotic, FOMO-driven compulsion to be ubiquitous and spontaneous, and embracing the defensive, self-preserving absolute joy of a tranquil evening at home in our loungewear.
The victory of loungewear.
We explored the massive fiscal shift from liquidating our money on fleeting experiences to finding genuine heart-racing thrill in a well-made sauté pan and the triumph of economical unit pricing at the grocery store.
And finally, we navigated the complex internal landscape. We moved from the crushing imposter syndrome, the echo chamber of comparison, and the constant stress of becoming, to the profound self-awareness, the acceptance of our own limitations, and the internal peace of simply being.
From becoming to being.
We examine that grand trade-off, willingly surrendering the intoxicating illusion of infinite potentiality in exchange for the ultimate relief of shedding the pervasive anxiety of wondering if we are enough.
It is an incredible universal journey, and as John and Emma point out so eloquently, neither phase is better or worse. Both phases are absolutely integral chapters of the human experience. You can't have the clarity of the 30s without the chaos of the 20s.
Indeed.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this right now and you're in your 20s, the core message you should take from this material is clear. Embrace the chaos.
Embrace it.
Stop beating yourself up for not having it all figured out. Understand that the volatility, the mistakes, the exhaustion, and the anxiety are all standard features of the process. They are the tools you use to build your foundation.
Absolutely.
And if you're in your 30s, 40s, or beyond, embrace the clarity. Don't mourn your youth. Relish the tranquility, the boundaries, and the profound self-acceptance you have fought so hard to earn.
To wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you with a direct challenge heavily inspired by the closing thoughts of Emma and John's conversation. It is a personal thought experiment tailored just for you wherever you are on this timeline.
I love this part.
I want you to think about your own trajectory. Look back at your evolution. What is one highly specific aspect of your younger self that you view with deep nostalgia, perhaps a specific memory of that infinite potentiality or a moment of boundless energy? And conversely, on the other side of the coin, what is one heavy psychological burden, one highly specific insecurity or anxiety that you are incredibly profoundly grateful to have shed?
It is a question that requires some quiet, honest reflection. But the answers you find will map the unique contours of your own personal evolution from becoming to being.
We will leave you to ponder your own answers to that. Thank you so much for spending your time with us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning, keep reflecting, and keep exploring the fascinating nuances of your own life journey.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Until next time. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're getting into something that is likely going to feel a bit like
looking in a mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A mirror. Especially if you happen to be navigating that incredibly strange, sometimes really messy transition.
Between your 20s and your 30s.
Right. Or, honestly, even if you're just looking ahead to that milestone.
And wondering what kind of psychological shift actually happens.
When you cross that threshold. Because you hear about it, but
living it is different.
So different. And we have a genuinely fascinating piece of source material today.
We do.
And I have to admit, right off the bat, it comes from a pretty unexpected place.
It really does.
We aren't looking at a sociology journal today.
Yeah.
Or a psychology textbook.
No.
We are looking at a transcript from an advanced English language learning program.
Specifically, it's a C2 level text, which, for anyone unfamiliar, is the absolute highest level of proficiency in the common European framework of reference for languages.
So the pinnacle of fluency. And this audio lesson is titled The Metamorphosis Part 2.
Hosted by two instructors named Emma and John.
Right. Now, on the surface, their goal is just to teach non-native speakers advanced vocabulary.
Idioms.
Natural conversational flow.
But in the process of trying to anchor this really complex vocabulary
to relatable concepts,
Emma and John accidentally deliver this incredibly sharp,
almost brutally honest
breakdown of aging.
Yeah, they basically use the existential dread of getting older to teach English grammar.
Which is a remarkably effective pedagogical tool when you think about it.
Oh, so?
Well, if you want to teach complex, nuanced idioms,
like phrases that rely heavily on cultural context.
Right, you have to map them onto universal human experiences.
And aging is
universal. The friction between the expectations society places on us and our own shifting biological and emotional realities as we age, that is about as universal as it gets.
Yeah.
What stands out in this text isn't just the vocabulary.
It's how systematically it deconstructs it.
Exactly. A psychological metamorphosis that feels intensely isolating when you're going through it.
But is actually highly predictable.
Highly.
And we are going to trace that exact roadmap today. We've pulled out the three major pillars from Emma and John's conversation.
The first being?
First, we are looking at the shift in ambition. The death of hustle culture.
Right.
Second, we're going to get into something they call cultural obsolescence.
Which sounds terrifying.
It really does, but it's actually about this surprising liberation.
Of realizing you're no longer the center of the cultural universe.
Yeah. And finally, we'll unpack temporal distortion.
Which is their breakdown of why time seemingly hits the accelerator the older you get.
Why a year feels like a month.
Exactly. The overarching theme here is tension.
The tension between the energy of youth
and the required pacing of adulthood.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that first pillar.
The illusion of hustle culture.
Right. So Emma and John start their lesson by drawing a very hard line.
Between the professional mindset of your 20s and what happens in your 30s.
Yeah, they explicitly state that in your 20s, hustle culture is the dominant operating system.
It's pervasive.
There's this narrative, which I'm sure you've felt if you've spent any time in a corporate environment.
It dictates a really punishing standard.
The implicit rule is that if you aren't completely exhausted,
you just aren't striving hard enough.
Exactly.
The phrasing they focus on to teach this concept is wearing burnout like a badge of honor.
A badge of honor, yeah.
That specific idiom is worth examining.
Because it reveals so much about the modern labor environment.
Right. Think about what a badge is. A badge isn't something you hide.
No, it's a visible symbol of achievement.
Something you pin to your lapel specifically so other people will notice it.
So by teaching this phrase, Emma and John are highlighting that in our 20s.
Exhaustion isn't viewed as a failure of time management.
Or a physical limitation.
It's the intended goal.
The exhaustion itself becomes the metric of your value to the organization.
Exactly.
But I wonder, and I was thinking about this while reading the transcript.
Yeah.
Is that a biological drive? Like that youthful need to prove yourself?
Cool.
Or is it just an economic trap that we fall into because we don't know any better yet?
That's a great question.
Because the text gets into this idea of the glorification of busyness.
Right.
Professional validation in that decade is just so tightly wound up in visibility.
Visibility is key. Emma and John list out these classic examples.
Frantically climbing the corporate ladder.
Staying late at the office when no one actually asked you to.
Oh, man. Answering emails at midnight.
Yes.
It makes you think about the sheer amount of energy spent.
Not necessarily doing good work.
But making sure people see you working.
That is the core of what the text refers to as performative productivity.
Performative productivity.
It's an incredibly useful term for language learners.
Because it captures such a specific cultural neurosis.
Performative productivity is the phenomenon where the appearance of labor
takes precedence over the actual output of that labor.
Exactly. And to answer your question about why we do this.
Biological or economic?
Right. It's largely structural.
Structural. How so?
Well, when you enter the workforce in your 20s, you don't have a track record.
You're unproven.
You lack the long-term portfolio of undeniable successes that a more senior person can lean on.
Right. You don't have the resume to just say, trust me, I know what I'm doing.
Precisely. So what is the only currency you have left to offer?
Just raw effort.
Your raw, unrefined energy, your visible sacrifice.
Wow.
You perform the act of working hard to prove you deserve your seat at the table.
You're compensating for a lack of established expertise.
With a surplus of visible effort.
That makes so much sense. But the inherent flaw in this strategy,
which the text points out beautifully,
is that it's fundamentally unsustainable.
Completely.
I mean, think about your own habits for a second. Have you ever drafted an email at, say, 4 p.m?
But intentionally scheduled it to send at 11:45 p.m.?
Yes. Or maybe you just left it sitting in your drafts and kept yourself awake.
Fighting your own circadian rhythm.
Just to hit send right before midnight.
Right.
You aren't doing that because the email needs to be read at midnight.
No one is reading it at midnight.
You're doing it to signal to your boss or your team.
That you are relentless.
Exactly. And imagining Emma and John explaining that specific neurotic behavior to a classroom of advanced English learners.
It really highlights how absurd the culture of performative productivity actually is.
It must sound like a bizarre corporate cult to someone entirely outside of it.
It does border on the absurd.
It really does.
Which is why the transition into the 30s, as described in the text, is framed not just as a change of pace,
but as a necessary awakening.
Exactly. The source moves into what they call a strategic pivot.
The facade of hustle culture begins to crack.
Under the weight of biological reality.
And this brings us to the law of diminishing returns.
Emma and John use this economic principle to describe human energy.
Which is such a brilliant crossover.
It really is.
Because in your 20s, you operate under this delusion that your energy is a bottomless well.
Right. If there's a problem, you just throw more hours at it.
More caffeine.
Less sleep.
Brute force.
But then, as you cross that threshold into your 30s,
that changes.
It does. You realize that putting in an extra 4 hours of frantic, exhausted work doesn't actually yield better results.
It often yields worse results.
Which you then have to spend time fixing the next day.
Right. What's fascinating here is how the text explores this evolution.
Specifically regarding boundaries.
Yeah. Because for a 20-something steeped in hustle culture, establishing a boundary,
like refusing to check Slack on a Sunday,
or logging off promptly at 5,
it's often stigmatized.
It's viewed as a luxury.
Or in more toxic environments, a lack of commitment.
Exactly. But Emma and John emphasize a paradigm shift here.
They do.
In your 30s, boundaries transition from being a luxury
to a strict necessity for survival.
But I want to push back on that slightly, though.
Okay.
Is it really just about survival?
What do you mean?
Or is it that we finally realize the reward for all that performative productivity wasn't what we were promised? Because if the late nights actually guaranteed a massive, fulfilling payoff, people might keep doing it.
True.
But I think the text implies that we stop because we realize the game is rigged, not just because our backs hurt.
It's definitely a confluence of both.
Both the physical and the mental.
Right. The physical and cognitive toll becomes harder to ignore, yes.
The recovery time from a sleepless night stretches from 1 day to 3.
Exactly. But you're right to point out the psychological disillusionment.
Yeah.
The text uses the classic idiom that a career is a marathon, not a sprint.
A marathon, not a sprint.
If you sprint the first 5 miles of a marathon, your collapse isn't just physical.
It's a realization that your pacing strategy was fundamentally flawed from the starting line. And that leads right into what is arguably the most striking metaphor in the entire transcript.
It's a powerful one.
Em and John are breaking down this shift from the sprint to the marathon.
And they introduce this idea about the questions we ask ourselves.
Regarding our ambitions.
Right. They note that in your 20s, the defining question of your professional life is...
How high can I climb?
It's a purely vertical ambition.
Exactly. You are just looking up.
You see the corporate ladder.
You grab the first rung.
And you just start scrambling upward as aggressively as possible.
You don't question the ladder itself.
You only question your speed.
But then, the text notes this profound shift.
In your 30s, you stop obsessing over how high you can climb.
And you finally stop to ask,
is this ladder even leaning against the right wall?
Is this ladder even leaning against the right wall?
It is a phenomenal metaphor for existential career doubt.
Let's really pull that apart.
Well, the 20s are characterized by blind velocity.
Right.
You inherit metrics of success from your environment.
From your parents, your university.
Social media, your peer group.
And these metrics are usually fairly standardized.
Job title, salary bracket, prestige of the firm.
You accept these as the definitive wall.
Exactly. You then expend massive amounts of your finite youthful energy
performing productivity
to scale the rungs of that specific ladder.
But then you hit the diminishing returns.
You get exhausted.
You're forced to slow down and adopt that marathon pace.
Precisely. And in that forced deceleration,
in the quiet space created by finally setting a boundary and going home at 5 p.m.,
you get your first real moment of vantage point.
You finally have the cognitive bandwidth to look around.
And assess your trajectory.
And the terrifying realization for many, which the text handles so adeptly.
Is that reaching the top of a ladder that leads to a destination you do not intrinsically value?
It's actually a worse outcome than never having climbed at all.
It's the ultimate sunk cost fallacy.
You've spent a decade climbing.
You're exhausted.
You've worn the burnout badge.
And you look around and realize,
I don't even like the view from up here.
I don't even care about what this company does.
It's a painful audit of your own ambition.
Very painful. You have to start untangling your authentic desires from the expectations you inherited.
You realize that all that hustle, all that frantic late-night email sending
was actually just a very loud distraction.
It kept you too busy to ask the hard questions about what genuinely gives your life meaning.
The hustle functions as an anesthetic against existential doubt.
That's a great way to put it. An anesthetic.
If you are constantly moving, you don't have to confront the possibility that you are moving in the wrong direction.
So think about the ladder you are on right now. When you look at your calendar for next week,
when you look at the tasks that are causing you stress,
are you doing them out of a deep, authentic sense of purpose?
Or is it just momentum?
Are you exhausted because you are engaged in meaningful, challenging work?
Or are you exhausted because you are still performing productivity?
On a ladder that somebody else propped up for you.
Because once you realize you're on the wrong wall,
the only logical move is to climb down.
Which takes a massive amount of courage.
A massive amount.
And that professional realignment often coincides with a broader personal realignment.
Which is exactly how Emma and John transition the lesson.
From the workplace into the cultural sphere.
Yeah, they introduce the concept of cultural obsolescence.
Moving from examining how you relate to your boss to how you relate to the zeitgeist.
And this part of the transcript is fascinating.
Because they managed to capture that very specific creeping panic.
Of realizing you are no longer the target demographic for mainstream culture.
Right. They described the experience of being in your 20s as being effortlessly plugged in.
You understand the slang, the fashion cycles.
The digital vernacular.
And the key point they make is that you don't have to study it.
You just know it.
You just know it.
They use the term cultural osmosis to describe this phenomenon.
Cultural osmosis.
It's an elegant use of a scientific term applied to sociology.
Osmosis being the passive movement.
Exactly, the passive movement of a substance across a membrane to achieve equilibrium.
So in this context,
when you are in your youth, you are entirely submerged in the high concentration fluid of the dominant culture.
The slang, The unspoken social rules of new apps.
The shifting aesthetics.
They pass through your permeable membrane without any active, conscious effort.
You absorb the zeitgeist simply by existing within it.
You breathe the air, and suddenly you know how to use the new emojis correctly.
Exactly.
But the reality check hits hard in the source material.
It does.
Emma and John point out that eventually that osmosis just stops.
The membrane thickens.
The torch gets passed to the next generation.
And suddenly you find yourself needing a translator for your own social media feeds.
They actually share this incredibly funny, highly relatable anecdote in the lesson.
About the phrase standing on business.
Yes. One of the hosts talks about hearing the phrase standing on business.
And experiencing that jarring moment of total incomprehension.
They had to discreetly open a new tab and Google the definition.
Just so they wouldn't look completely out of touch in front of a younger colleague.
Which is, I've definitely been there.
It's a perfect example for an English lesson.
Because the hosts themselves are demonstrating the feeling of being a language learner.
In their own native tongue.
Yeah. But underneath the humor, the term cultural obsolescence carries a significant psychological weight.
It really does. The word obsolescence usually refers to machinery or technology.
Like a piece of hardware that is no longer functional or supported.
Right. So applying it to a human being's cultural relevance implies a profound loss of utility.
It sounds like being phased out.
Exactly.
Like an old smartphone that just can't download the new software update.
That is exactly how it feels. And it can trigger a real identity crisis.
Because you spent so long being the center.
Right. When you spend your formative years, your teens and 20s, as the absolute center of the cultural narrative,
you develop a blind spot.
Every marketing campaign, every major entertainment franchise,
every new social platform.
It's all explicitly engineered to capture your attention.
And catered to your specific habits.
Because of that constant reinforcement, it is incredibly easy to subconsciously conflate your personal relevance with cultural relevance.
You think you matter because the culture keeps telling you that your demographic matters.
Precisely. So when that alignment inevitably fractures,
or when the algorithm shifts,
and you suddenly require a translator to navigate a digital landscape you once mastered intuitively,
it forces an existential confrontation.
You realize, perhaps for the first time, that the world is moving forward.
The culture is evolving.
And it is doing so without consulting you.
It is entirely indifferent to your confusion. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
How Emma and John handle this.
Yes. Because they don't frame this obsolescence as a tragedy.
Not at all.
They don't suggest you need to fight it or start dressing like a teenager.
Or force yourself to use slang that feels unnatural.
Instead, they present this fading of relevance as something strangely, beautifully liberating.
They frame being uncool as a profound relief.
It's a brilliant reframing.
They suggest that the pressure to be relevant, to be cutting edge, is actually a massive burden.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 20s are often plagued by an underlying anxiety of relevance.
Because your professional and personal identities are still somewhat malleable.
You rely heavily on external cultural markers to signal your value.
And you're belonging to the tribe.
You need the right aesthetic, the right media consumption habits,
the fluency in micro-trends, just to maintain your social standing.
It is an exhausting amount of cognitive load.
It's like having 50 tabs open in your brain at all times.
Constantly refreshing them to make sure you know what the internet has decided is acceptable today.
Versus what was acceptable yesterday.
The fear of being cringe dictates so much behavior in that decade.
But Emma and John argue that in your 30s, you can finally just let that pressure evaporate.
They explicitly connect the abandonment of microtrends to an increase in mental clarity.
They use the idiom ignorance is bliss.
And in this context, it's not about willful ignorance of important global events.
No, it's the strategic ignoring of fleeting cultural noise.
When you stop expending your finite cognitive resources trying to decode the chaotic, hyper-accelerated landscape of digital vernacular,
that mental bandwidth is returned to you.
You get your brain back.
You do. The liberation comes from the realization that you no longer have to perform for the culture.
In the exact same way you realized you no longer have to perform productivity for your boss.
The two pillars are deeply connected.
You transition from chasing relevance to cultivating resonance.
You begin to choose your media, your hobbies, your aesthetic, and your routines.
based entirely on what resonates with your authentic internal self.
Completely divorced from their cultural currency.
That distinction.
Right.
Relevance versus resonance, it is everything.
It's a fundamental shift in values.
And it's something you can practically apply right now.
Think about the things you genuinely enjoy.
Maybe it's a specific genre of music that hasn't been popular in 15 years.
Maybe it's a deeply uncool hobby.
Or a style of clothing that the internet has declared outdated.
The permission Emma and John are granting in this lesson is to just enjoy those things without apology.
You don't need a viral trend to validate your joy.
The mental clarity that comes from just saying, I don't know what that slang means and I do not care, is incredible.
Because the reality is, the time we spend worrying about staying culturally relevant is time we frankly cannot afford to waste.
Which brings us to the third major theme of the text.
Temporal distortion.
This is where the source material moves from the sociological into the philosophical.
And even the neurological.
They address a nearly universal human perception.
The terrifying sensation that time accelerates as we age.
Emma and John introduce the proportional theory of time.
And even though I think we all intuitively feel it, hearing the math behind it laid out so plainly.
It's a massive aha moment.
It perfectly explains why we constantly find ourselves saying, where did the year go?
They break it down like this.
When you are a 5-year-old child, one single year represents a full 20% of your entire existence on Earth.
The fifth of your life.
So, of course, a single year feels like an absolute eternity.
A summer vacation feels like an entire epoch.
Because mathematically, relative to your accumulated experience,
it is an epoch.
But there's also a critical neurological component to this theory that the text touches upon.
When you are a child or even a young adult, you're constantly encountering novel stimuli.
The rules of complex social interaction.
The physical navigation of new environments.
The acquisition of new skills.
Everything requires active processing.
Your brain is constantly recording.
Yes. The brain processes novel, unencountered experiences by creating dense, highly detailed neural pathways and memories.
Because the brain is working so hard to encode all this new data.
When you look back on that period of time, the sheer volume of detailed memories makes the duration feel incredibly long.
The density of the experience expands the perception of the time past. But then Emma and John note, you hit your 30s.
And suddenly, a year is just a blip.
One of the hosts uses the phrase, I blink, and suddenly, it is Christmas again.
And again, the math backs up the feeling.
By the time you are 30, a single year is roughly 3% of your life.
It is a statistically insignificant fraction compared to when you were 5.
And neurologically, you aren't encountering as much novelty.
You've commuted to the same office 100 times.
You've gone to the grocery store 1,000 times.
Your brain isn't recording every detail because it already has a template for these routines.
So the year just slides by in a blur of familiar patterns.
But the crucial part of this section isn't just the mechanics of why time speeds up.
It's the psychological reaction to that acceleration.
This temporal distortion induces a deeply profound sense of urgency.
However, Emma and John are very careful to distinguish this new urgency from the frantic anxiety of the 20s.
Right, because we've already established that the urgency to climb the ladder has been abandoned.
Exactly. The urgency of the 20s is an urgency to achieve.
It is forward-looking and acquisitive.
The urgency that arrives in your 30s, brought on by the visceral realization of temporal distortion,
is an urgency to experience and to appreciate.
It is the sudden, acute awareness of the finite nature of your own timeline.
The text highlights how this realization forces you to be present.
In your 20s, it is so easy to live entirely in the future.
You treat the present moment as just a waiting room for the next big milestone.
You're waiting for the promotion.
Waiting to move to the better apartment.
Waiting to find the perfect partner.
You are constantly rushing through today because you are convinced that tomorrow is when your actual life begins.
It's the illusion of abundant time.
When time is perceived as an infinite resource, it is easily squandered on future projections.
The defining illusion of youth is that there will always be a later to enjoy the fruits of your labor.
The profound revelation of the 30s,
triggered by the shock of blinking and realizing another year has vanished,
is that the present moment is the only reliable asset you actually possess.
So the urgency to appreciate isn't about packing more activities into a day.
No, it's almost a defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism.
That's a very accurate way to frame it. It is a defense mechanism against the terrifying velocity of life.
You realize that if you do not actively anchor yourself in the present moment,
The math of proportional time guarantees that the next decade will slip through your fingers even faster than the last.
You have to stop staring at the horizon and start paying profound attention to what is immediately in front of you. I really want you to think about how you've perceived the last 12 months.
Did the year drag on, full of rich, detailed memories?
Or did you blink and suddenly you were hanging up a new calendar?
And more importantly, how are you treating today?
Are you treating this current season of your life as just an obstacle you need to get through to reach some future goal?
Are you waiting for your real life to start?
Because the math of temporal distortion is entirely unforgiving.
If you are constantly rushing to the next thing, you will accelerate the blur.
This realization of finite time naturally leads to the final, synthesizing concept of Emma and John's lesson.
They referred to this overarching transition as the grand metamorphosis.
And to summarize the fundamental difference between the two decades, they contrast two distinct processes.
Accumulation versus distillation.
This is where all the threads pull together.
They lay out the 20s as the decade of accumulation.
It makes sense. You enter adulthood as a sponge.
You are trying to build the raw material of a life, so you gather everything.
You hoard accolades.
You collect a massive, sprawling network of friends and acquaintances.
You say yes to every project.
You buy into every passing trend.
You just want more, because you haven't yet figured out what you actually need.
Accumulation is the logical strategy of an exploratory phase.
Because you do not yet possess a firm grasp of your own authentic values.
You acquire as much varied experience and social capital as possible.
You attend the networking events.
You maintain the superficial connections.
You try on different personas.
But the inevitable consequence of endless accumulation is noise.
The architecture of a 20-something's life is often incredibly loud, cluttered, and chaotic.
Simply because they haven't yet developed the discriminatory faculties to filter out what does not serve them.
Which is why the shift into the 30s feels so distinct.
Emma and John introduced the concept of distillation.
Distillation. The host in the audio lesson clearly loves this word, and the way they describe it is incredibly potent.
Distillation is the process of keeping only what truly matters and actively discarding the excess noise.
It's about reducing your life to its most essential essence.
The metaphor of distillation is perfectly chosen here.
If we think about the physical process, say distilling water or spirits,
it is a method of separation and purification.
You take a complex, chaotic, volatile mixture,
which perfectly represents the accumulated experiences, habits, and anxieties of your 20s.
Then you apply heat.
And in this context, the heat is that sense of temporal distortion.
It's the pressure of realizing your time and energy are finite.
Exactly. The pressure of biological limits and accelerating time acts as the heat source.
As the mixture boils, the different components separate.
The impurities, the toxic elements, the excess volume that dilutes the core.
They're all separated and removed.
What you are left with, the distillate,
is pure, highly concentrated, and profoundly potent. It's an active, conscious unburdening.
You apply that heat, and you watch the toxic hustle culture boil away.
You let the performative productivity evaporate.
The anxiety of needing to understand every internet micro-trend, gone.
And what you are left with is the concentrate.
The few people who actually matter and energize you.
The boundaries that protect your peace of mind.
A career path that is finally leaning against a wall you chose for yourself.
It's the essential essence of who you are without the performance.
What makes distillation different from simply giving up or settling?
Is that it requires intense intentionality.
Accumulation can happen passively.
You can just drift through a decade picking up habits, debt, and acquaintances like static cling.
But distillation requires you to actively choose what to discard and what to keep.
It is the conscious editing of your own existence. And Emma and John conclude their lesson with a really beautiful, grounding piece of advice regarding this metamorphosis.
They simply tell their students, do not fear the shift.
They acknowledge that leaving behind the chaotic, high-voltage energy of youth can feel like a loss at first.
But they reassure the listener that there is a richness and a depth to the distilled life.
That the frantic accumulation phase simply cannot replicate.
They give 3 very specific imperatives.
Embrace the boundaries.
Embrace the uncoolness.
And my absolute favorite phrase from the entire text, embrace the sauté pan.
The sauté pan is a wonderfully evocative idiom to end on.
It serves as a stand-in for the quiet, domestic, rhythmic tasks of adulthood.
That someone in their 20s might view as tedious or restrictive.
When your primary goal is rapid accumulation, Taking the time to cook a meal is an inconvenience.
It's time that could be spent hustling or networking.
But when you transition into the phase of distillation,
the act of cooking, the sensory reality of the kitchen,
becomes a mindful grounding practice.
It represents finding profound peace in the present moment, safely insulated from the frantic noise of the zeitgeist.
It perfectly captures the move from ordering 2 a.m. takeout while answering performative emails
to finding absolute, unapologetic joy in the quiet act of chopping onions in your own kitchen at 6 p.m.
So, as we pull back and look at the whole journey we've taken today,
it's amazing how much insight was packed into a language lesson.
We've traced the arc from the exhausting, performative burnout of hustle culture
through the necessary survival-based setting of boundaries as we face our diminishing physical energy.
We've navigated the initial panic and then the ultimate liberation of losing the cultural zeitgeist.
And we've confronted the terrifying math of time speeding up,
which ultimately acts as the catalyst for the beautiful, intentional process of distilling our lives down to what actually matters.
It is a remarkably comprehensive roadmap of adult maturation.
And true to its nature, as an instructional text, Emma and John do not let their students go without demanding some active reflection on the material.
Right. They end the lesson with a specific discussion question to test comprehension.
But it works perfectly as a mirror for us.
It does.
I want to pose their question directly to you to think about as you go about the rest of your day.
To what extent do you believe that hustle culture is toxic? And have you successfully implemented professional boundaries in your own life?
It's a direct challenge. Are you still wearing burnout as a badge of honor, hoping someone notices?
Or have you learned to protect your finite energy and distill your focus?
As you ponder your own relationship with those boundaries, I want to leave you with one final, broader consideration.
Throughout this deep dive, we have explored the metamorphosis from accumulation to distillation, primarily as an internal, individual psychological journey.
But consider the macroeconomic implications of this text.
If the transition from the 20s to the 30s is defined by this hard shift,
from hustle and blind accumulation to strict boundaries and distillation,
what happens to the global workplace when an entire generation collectively hits this phase at the exact same time?
If millions of professionals simultaneously realize that the latter is leaning against the wrong wall,
if they collectively refuse to engage in performative productivity at midnight,
and if they all demand that boundaries are a necessity for survival rather than a luxury to be earned,
could this individual psychological metamorphosis force a massive systemic collapse of corporate hustle culture as we know it?
Are we merely looking at the predictable biology of aging, or are we looking at the underlying blueprint for a quiet labor revolution? If millions of people just suddenly decide the prestige isn't worth the exhaustion,
the entire system would have to rewrite its fundamental code.
Because it relies on that endless supply of raw, unrefined 20-something energy to function.
That is an incredible thought to leave on.
It reframes aging from a slow decline into an act of quiet rebellion.
It really does.
So what does this all mean? It means the best is yet to come.
The exhaustion of your early career isn't a permanent state,
but the catalyst for the clarity and depth that follows.
It means the best and most authentic parts of the journey are still being distilled.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Your willingness to reflect on these complex shifts is what makes this show work.
Keep asking the hard questions. Keep checking the wall your ladder is leaning against, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.